Okay, so Matthew 18, and hi, by the way. It's good to see all of you this evening. But we are in Matthew chapter 18, starting in verse 1. It says, "At that time the disciples came to Jesus, saying, 'Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them and said, 'Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fashioned around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea.'" Now, I think that it is a great desire to be great in the kingdom of heaven. I think that's a fantastic desire to want to be great. However, that's not the question they asked, is it? They didn't ask who's going to be great. It's not who's going to be great in the kingdom. It's not just who's done a good job, who's been a good disciple, who's been really fulfilling discipleship in the kingdom of heaven. I mean, the reality is Jesus kind of already answered this question back when we were talking in Matthew chapter 5 and Matthew chapter 6 and Matthew chapter 7, talking about here's a disciple, here's what it means to live in the kingdom, here's what it means to do great things for the kingdom. But this question here isn't just who's great in the kingdom, but it's who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So who's the GOAT, right? Who's the greatest of all time? Who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom? And we know from Mark chapter 9 and verse 33 and in Luke chapter 9 and verse 46 that the setup for this question is that the disciples have actually been arguing about who's going to be the great, or who's the greatest. They've been arguing about that. I'll read it from Luke chapter 9 verse 46. Luke chapter 9 and verse 46 just says, "An argument arose among them as to which of them was the greatest." Do you think that Thomas said, "I doubt it's me"? Nah, that was... So, I don't know if all 12 of them were kind of making a case for themselves. I don't know if they were kind of selecting a few of them and kind of saying, "Well, I think this one's going to be the best one," or the greatest, or whatever. I don't know exactly how all that played out. But as Matthew, Mark, and Luke come at this scenario from different angles, we do know that as a part of this picture, these guys have been arguing not just about what are the greatest characteristics for discipleship or what those are. It's not even how can I be a great disciple, or how can I be the best disciple that I can be, or how can I be the best servant in the kingdom of heaven that I can be. It's which one of us is the greatest. And then somewhere in this, even as Jesus is talking to them about it, they straight up ask Jesus, "Well, could you solve this for us? Could you solve this question for us?" I mean, there's obviously this point where Jesus says, "What are you guys talking about?" And, I'm sure they don't want to tell him because they've been arguing. But at some point in this, they just go ahead and they hand it over to him and say, "Well, would you just finish this for us and tell us who's the greatest? Who's the greatest?" And it seems like there's more folks around here for this question, which tells me, if this was a private dispute that they were having among themselves, it had made its way into the public, because Jesus is able to look out in verse 2 and call to himself a child and put him in the midst of them. And so here's our object lesson for greatness. It's a little child. And it's interesting. Anytime I picture Jesus talking to the disciples, it's almost like I see them all off somewhere and nobody else is around, and he's secretly teaching them. But here's this moment where the apostles are talking to him, but he's able to reach out and say, look, there's a kid right over here. And, bring the kid to me. And I'm guessing that if there was one little kid over there might have been more kids over there. And if there were some kids over there might have been some adults over there, maybe some parents, some other adults around. So I doubt it's just Jesus talking to these 12 apostles and then some random kid just kind of wanders around. I don't think that's what's going on. I think we've got crowds of people as he looks out and he's able to call a child to himself who's nearby. So, and what an unexpected response too. It's an unexpected response as the disciples are expecting Jesus to name one of them. All right? They're expecting him to point to one of them and say, well, you're the greatest, Peter. You're the greatest, whoever. I mean, that's kind of what they're expecting. But no, he goes outside of this group and he calls a child over to him and says, it's this child. And that's a pretty humbling thing in and of itself, to look out beyond the 12, to look out past the 12 apostles, and in this moment say, no, you guys need to learn to be like this kid. And he specifically points out, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So it's specifically talking about humility here. And this causes me a little bit of a struggle. I'm trying to figure out what is this humility of a child that he's bringing up here. I'm trying to figure that out, because what is it about children that's like this natural humility? Because I have 3 kids. I have 3 kids, and kids come out of the womb demanding to be the center of attention. That they're demanding to have all of their needs met. In fact, to get them beyond that, you have to kind of train them out of that. You have to kind of teach them out of that. And so I'm struggling a little bit. But then I think, well, maybe this isn't about psychology, the child psychology, or anything like that. Maybe this is about what's actually happening in the moment, where these men are in this competition. And think about the various things that they might have said as they're arguing about this in order to declare themselves the greatest. And I don't know what they're holding up as criteria for I'm the greatest. I don't know if it's I'm the strongest, I'm the smartest, I love more, I care more, I give more, I serve more. I don't know. But here's what I know about this kid. I don't have to know anything else about this kid, but I know this. It doesn't matter what competition that they come up with, this kid, I don't believe, can even really compete with that. He's not going to be the smartest. He's not going to be the strongest. He's not going to be the most holy or the wealthiest or anything like that. So whatever this competition is, he can't really compete. And I might be barking up the wrong tree here, so I want you guys to give me your thoughts on this as well. But I think the humility here is really the idea that guys, you can't be the greatest in the kingdom until you quit worrying about being the greatest in the kingdom. Until you realize that there's no competition here and you guys don't even really have a dog in the fight. Right? Now going back to verse 3, he said, "Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." The New King James Version, I like the way the New King James Version says it. It says, "Assuredly I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven." Now, in verse 4, where he says, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And that's a relative pronoun. That's basically saying anybody, whoever, anybody we're just talking about qualifications here. You could do that. I could do that. Anyone can do that. That could be anyone. But that statement in verse 3 where he says, unless you are converted, that's emphatic. That's pointed. He says, truly, assuredly, I say to you, and I'm not talking to anyone else but you apostles, the 12 apostles, you 12 who have brought this argument to me, I'm talking to you, and here's what I have to say to you. Unless you turn, or unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Now if you think about that, that's interesting, because these guys have come to Jesus asking, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus basically says, let me tell you something, guys, if you don't stop this nonsense, not only will you not be greatest in the kingdom of heaven, you won't even be in the kingdom of heaven. And that's the apostles. These are the ones who have left everything to follow him. But I mean, if you just think about the question and think about the humility and that's lacking in just the question. I mean, who's the greatest in the kingdom? What's the real answer to that? Who is the greatest in the kingdom? Who's the greatest in the kingdom? The greatest in the kingdom is God, Jesus, the King, right? The King of heaven. That's the greatest. And so, do they really think that it's going to be one of them who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? I don't know. So, what are y'all's thoughts on that? We're going to pick up here in we're going to back up to verse 5, and we're going to read through verse 10 here in a second. But before we do that, y'all have any thoughts on any of this stuff?
Well, they're on two different pages completely. The apostles were actually looking at who is, which one of us are, and Jesus is totally different. He's looking at the innocence, and he's looking at the cleanliness of a baby and a child, and they got to pick that up eventually. But I always use the example, if you can have a half a dozen 3 or 4 year olds, and you have a black one, a Spanish one, you can have 4 or 5 different nationalities out there, and they play together. They don't recognize each other's color. Mm-hmm. They play together and have fun because they don't know any better. They're innocent in that respect. Mm-hmm. You give them a little maturity and let them listen to some of the older people. Now they start building different concepts. Some
of those things have to be taught.
Yeah.
You have to be taught to hate and discriminate and,
but
all those things.
Unless you become like one of them and are washed with the blood, my blood, you just don't qualify.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Somebody else have any?
I got 2 thoughts. One, I don't think the apostles like kids. So I can't get that.
It seems like they get annoyed. They get annoyed with the children. They get annoyed with this lady who's coming over. And so they get kind of annoyed with these other people.
I think that they really, and the way my mind goes back to is chapter 17. They were wondering why they couldn't cast out the demon. And we kind of came to the conclusion that there's a potential that they were relying on their own merit there. And then, they're arguing here about who's going to be the greatest. And then 2 chapters later, we see the mother of the sons of Zebedee coming and asking, who's going to sit on your right and left? Mm-hmm. And I think they may have still been caught up in this potentially physical kingdom mindset that they were looking to elevate themselves in some way.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. Definitely.
Verse 4, he says, whoever then humbles himself as this child. I wonder if the child is a standard of humility, or rather life after it messes with us a while, humbling ourselves is where we get back to the pure nature of a child.
Yeah, that could definitely be the case as well. Going back to humbling yourself to try to get back to that. That's a challenge, isn't it? All right, great points. Thank you guys. I want to back up just a little bit to verse 5, because I think this all kind of goes together. Even though it kind of breaks them up, I think it goes together. Starting in verse 5, it says, "Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fashioned around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world for temptations to sin, for it is necessary that temptations come, but woe to the one by whom the temptations come. And if your hand or your foot causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life crippled or lame than with 2 hands, 2 feet to be thrown into eternal life. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out, throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than 2 eyes and be thrown into the hell of fire. See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven." Now, like I said, it looks like we kind of jump paragraphs here, but I think that Matthew, in kind of a literary fashion here, is setting up a section of Scripture with some stories, with some vignettes that actually all kind of go together. And while we could pull each one out and learn from just that one, even separate out from its context, in context, I think we're supposed to kind of be seeing this driving toward this, what does this humility look like? What does this humility actually look like? And it seems like over these last few chapters, this idea of kind of like what Ray was bringing up, this whole idea here of being humble and not competing, it just seems to keep coming up. Even as Jesus rebukes them and challenges them and tries to draw them back, it's like they just keep going back to it. And here's why I bring this up. I want us to see that when we move into this next paragraph that's talking about stumbling blocks, rather than our mind thinking that we've moved on to a new section, I think what we're starting to see is some vignettes, some stories that are actually going to tell us, here's what it looks like to be humble, to be converted and become like little children. So verse 5 kind of gives that litmus test. Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. So if you're the kind of person who can be with the least and the last and the lowly, if you're the kind of person who's not afraid that their humiliation is going to rub off on you and it's going to make you look bad, if you can receive a child, then you're moving toward that humility. Then you have that humility. And then in the midst of this discussion about receiving as opposed to despising, his big point is don't put stumbling blocks. Don't put stumbling blocks before these little ones who have put their faith in me. Don't scandalize them. And he says in verse 6, "But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fashioned around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea." And so we know this is bad. I mean, if it makes you want to fasten a great millstone around someone's neck and drown them in the depths of the sea, or to maim yourself so that you're not involved in this. I mean, we know this must be really, really bad. I do believe that this should be a scandalous thing to us. I think that in our minds, it should be scandalous to cause someone to stumble, to put stumbling blocks before them. And comparing the mindset of those who are arrogant and proud, comparing that to the person who is humble, the arrogant and proud person says, here's something that I want to do, and I have a right to do this, and you can't prove to me that it is wrong, so I'm going to go ahead and do this. However, the humble person says, it's true, I do have the right to do this, but you know what? I'm not going to do it. I'm going to forego my rights in order to keep from causing you to stumble. And I'm not only concerned about my walk, but I'm also concerned about your walk. It's having a mindset of thinking of others and not just yourself. And I think verse 10 goes along with this paragraph. Verse 10 says, "See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that in heaven their angels always see the face of their Father who is in heaven." So don't despise. Receive. Don't despise. And we're despising these little ones if we're saying, I care so little about you that I don't care if I drop a rock right in front of you, causing you to sin. And I can't help but think about children today. I mean, we live in terrible times. We're always hearing these awful stories about terrible things that are done to kids, whether it's some type of abuse or manipulation or trafficking. And I think about the kids when I think about these passages, and it just breaks my heart. But look, his whole point is the kids are the least. They're the last. They're the lowly. And because he's using them as an object lesson, I think he's saying, just like them, the folks who humbly submit, who aren't worried about competing to be the greatest in the kingdom, they're like these little ones. And we should treat them exactly the same way, protecting and preserving their souls and their eternities. It seems like there's a lot of pushback these days when it comes to stumbling blocks. A lot of pushback on that. If you make a case about, don't do this because it may cause someone to sin. Don't do this because it's a stumbling block. There seems to always be a person who jumps up and says, well, it's their responsibility whether or not they're going to sin. And yes, that's true. It's absolutely their responsibility. And the thing about this is when we stand before God in judgment, I am not going to be able to say, Lord, yes, it's true, I did do those things, but he was a stumbling block. And so it's his fault. We're not going to be able to do that. God's going to say, no, it was still your responsibility not to stumble over that rock. However, at the same time, when you're someone who has been a stumbling block and you have caused others to sin and you have laid that temptation out before others, when they stand before God, when you stand before God at that point and you're the one who's been doing those things, then you're not going to be able to say, well, look, they were responsible for their own actions. Well, yeah, they were responsible, and they'll have to answer for that. But let me tell you, one of your responsibilities was, don't be a stumbling block. You're not supposed to be a stumbling block, and if you're doing that, you're going to have to answer for that. They're going to have to answer for their sins, you're going to have to answer for your sins, but you're also going to have to answer to the fact that you're causing them to sin by being a stumbling block. So, and I see such strong warnings here against participating in sin or causing someone to sin. When you look at this hyperbole, I think it's hyperbole. He says, cut your hand off before you do that, or pluck your eye out before you do that. And yes, it's hyperbole, but that ought to teach me how serious these things are. And again, we have a tendency to think about these two sentences and talking about like they're talking about something else. And he was talking about me causing someone to stumble, but now he's talking about me stumbling, and I need to watch out for my stumbling. But my stumbling is in the context of causing others to stumble. And so when I stumble, it's because I'm pursuing something that makes me a stumbling block to others. And he's saying it's so important for you to not be a stumbling block that you need to be humble enough to cut off your hand. Be humble enough to cut off your foot. Don't be self-righteous. Don't be proud. Don't be arrogant. Don't have the hubris that I get to keep my hand because it's mine and I have the right to it. Don't be a stumbling block. Yes, it's hyperbole. Yes, it's a metaphor. We're not talking about literally cutting off hands. But it's the idea that these things that I think are so important, don't hang on to them at the expense of your soul or at the expense of the souls of those who are around us. You know, these figures of speech are written in extremes in order to make a point. And the figures of speech are used as literary speed bumps. They're literary speed bumps. You know, it's easy just to be reading something and you read right through it and you're thinking, you know, I've heard this before, so we're just gonna read right past and move on. And you end up missing the whole point. But figures of speech are used to grab our attention as we're reading through. All of a sudden it's, wait, what did he just say? Did he just tell me I'm supposed to cut my hand off? And it wakes you up and it draws you back in. Now, there have been people who have taken that literally, but I don't think that that's what Jesus is saying. However, we also don't need to make the mistake that, it's just a metaphor, and so it means nothing. Well, you know, he didn't mean we're really supposed to cut off our hands. I figured that out, so let's move on. No, we need to think, well, what did he mean by that? All right, he didn't mean to literally cut off your hand. But the reason he's using this metaphor is because what he's encouraging us to do will feel like we're cutting our hand off. It'll feel like we're cutting our hand off, and that's important. It's that important that we know what we're talking about here. Whatever the thing we're doing is, it's going to make it, or that we're trying to get rid of, it's going to make it feel like it. So the things that we're getting rid of in order to avoid stumbling and being a stumbling block, it's going to be like cutting my hand off if it's my hand that's causing me to become the stumbling block. And it's this idea that this is something that's so important to you, so dear to you, that it feels like it's a part of you. It feels like it's a part of you. And I'm supposed to be humble enough that in order to preserve and protect the lives of the least and the last and the lowly, I'll give that up. I'll cut that off. I'll sever that, and I'll get rid of all that. And so that's what I think. Did you have your hand up? Okay. So that's what we're talking about on that. Sorry, I forgot where I was going. That's all right. Go ahead.
Two thoughts. One is, you know, when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, they both were punished for it, right?
Uh-huh.
So even the person that caused the other person to stumble, they both received their punishment in full.
Right.
Second point, I think that the tangible component of this is that we need to be almost like taking a proactive approach to preventing ourselves from being in an environment where we may sin. Case in point, if someone struggles with pornography, they shouldn't have internet. Or, you know, if they have a problem, you know, looking at lusting at other people, maybe they should go to a different gym, or just different things like that. Taking a proactive approach to make sure that we are not causing either ourselves or someone else to stumble.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's a good point. That when you think about this, we can get so wrapped up in our behaviors, whether it's sinful or not, that they kind of become a part of us, right? And so if we're doing a sinful behavior and we need to cut that off, it might feel like we're cutting our hand off because we have such a draw to that. But I think that's what it's saying. These are some major things that we feel like we're losing a part of ourselves sometimes when we're getting rid of them, even if that part of us is something we need to get rid of. So, but I think that's a good point. Those are a couple of good examples of what those things might be.
For me, it is another example in the Bible of how the parents should teach their children. Just because you get angry with them, remember who you have to report to eventually.
Yeah.
And if you screw up, it's not the kid, it's you.
Yeah, you gotta, yeah, that's true. We're all gonna answer and for our own sins, right? For our own things. That's right. And so, this is another way of talking about this. I think this is another way of talking about self-sacrifice when you think about it. However, I hardly ever think of that term when I read this, even though with this hyperbole, this metaphor, whatever, what have you, it's hard to imagine a picture that's more sacrificial, self-sacrificial than this. Particularly when I make the connection, I should do this in order to benefit someone else. I should do this in the spirit of protecting and blessing someone else, as opposed to just doing it for my own self-preservation. Did you say?
I think Marcia did.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I pass you up?
I think one terrible thing that has been taught is, original sin and that babies are born in sin. And I think it makes people look at babies as, like you were saying, yes, they're so demanding and yes, they have so many needs and stuff, but they're so weak. They can't get up and get the milk or anything.
That's right.
So that's the only way they can get something because they have no power.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're supposed to empty ourselves like Jesus emptied himself completely, and he was God.
Yeah.
So that's why children are just like Jesus and vice versa, because they've given up, or they've been born in that situation, they haven't had any sin yet.
Yeah.
And so they're like Christ that way. And and we're supposed to protect that innocence as long as we can.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes that means we may have to, give up some of the things that we want in order, self-sacrifice in order to protect and not be a stumbling block,
For verse number 6, I've often heard people refer to that as the teachers of the little children being the ones that are responsible for how we do guide them, kind of like what Miss Christine was saying, the parents, right? But not only the parents, the teachers, and those that are teaching, what is the content that they're teaching? Are we so-called indoctrinating those kids, or are we teaching them directly from the Bible?
Yeah, and it's a great responsibility because it's whoever, and like I said, I think that means whoever, anybody who's teaching or has any kind of influence on these folks. If you're causing them to sin because you're a person of authority or influence, or you're influential in their lives, and you're causing them to sin through your teaching or through your actions or anything else, I think you will have to answer for that.
I think this section here is just so powerful when Jesus used the word woe twice. And then you think about maybe like a horse or your old westerns, and they pull back and say, whoa. And he tells us twice in this, and he uses the words eternal fire and hell twice too, and cutting off limbs and stuff. It kind of gets your attention. It's something that we should take seriously.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's the intention. I think that they use those metaphors and so forth to let you know, to grab your attention and say, yeah, this is a serious thing. I mean, when you think about it, what's more serious than, okay, I gotta cut my hand off or my foot off, or if there's a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the ocean to be drowned. These are some serious images, right? So this means this is a very serious thing that he's talking about. And when you talk about self-sacrifice and giving up things that are a part of me, I'm kind of going along with Marcia here. Let's read Philippians chapter 2 and verse 3 real quick. Philippians 2, starting in verse 3, it says, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interests of others. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. So if you want to talk about cutting off hands and cutting off feet and plucking out eyes, imagine being the one who is sitting on the throne of God. Sitting on the throne of God, and at any moment anybody comes into your presence, their natural response is to fall on their face and worship you. But then you empty yourself of self. I believe that's what he's talking about when he talks about he emptied himself. He emptied himself of self. He left all of that and came into this world, and instead of trying to hold on to it and saying, no, this is what I deserve. I deserve all this stuff that I'm leaving. But he didn't do that. And why? Why did he leave all that? He left all of that and sacrificed so that people like you and people like me could be saved. It's so that we could be saved. He did it for the least. He did it for the lowly. He did it for those who had come to him in humility, recognizing that I'm not the greatest. I'm not even trying to be the greatest. I just want to follow the one who is the greatest. And Jesus isn't asking us to do anything that he hasn't done. You know, we follow his example. I mean, he can say, I gave all of it up. I laid it all down in order to bless and to save others. I gave up my crown. I gave up my throne. I gave up the worship that I deserve. I gave up all of these things that I have a right to. All right? Sometimes we get caught up in what our rights are. I gave up all this stuff that I have a right to for others. Sacrificed for others. So we need to kind of be able to follow that same example.
One of the things that really stand out to me in this, Matt, verse 6 there was brought up a few minutes ago, but as Christians, boy, we really need to realize how serious our example is. And we're talking about babes in Christ here. Any mature Christian or anybody beyond the babe stage that causes one of these babes to stumble, look at the consequences. You know, millstone tied around his neck. You know, Jesus takes that very, very serious. Mm-hmm. Once we obey the gospel, we understand the truth, then our example should be good. And if we do fall, which we will, we need to repent and show that, so that this babe does not fall away because of it. And I think we really need to be aware of that, because our example is so important.
I think that is right too. I think the things that we do matter, and we need to act like they matter.
I kind of get the feeling that the disciples really didn't grab it, because later on in Matthew 20:28, Jesus tells them again, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Mm-hmm. Now that doesn't sound like I deserve, or I'm better, I'm the greatest. That sounds more like we need to follow the servitude attitude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's right. And Jesus demonstrates that over and over again, being a servant. I came not to serve, or not to be served, but to serve, right? And yeah, that's exactly right. And he's constantly setting the example for them, for us. They didn't always get it. I'm not sure we always get it either.
That's like that right that you talked about, that we have a right to. I think that's totally something of the world and secular, and really, what do we have a right to?
Mm-hmm. Especially in this country, right? I mean, yeah.
When we look at the Bible, what do we have a right to?
Yeah, that's exactly
the
right.
The grace of God. It's really the only, and to be with Him.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Thank you guys. I appreciate it.